Dr. Steve Akoth is the Vice Chair of the National Steering Committee on the Implementation of Alternative Justice Systems. We've been talking about AJS for a while now, an initiative of the Chief Justice in the judiciary. Today being Thursday, our conversations, hashtag Justice Thursdays, go back to AJS. Dr. Akoth, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante sana.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Well, it doesn't look so hot, but it's okay.
Abbas.
That's the whole point.
Yes.
To make you comfortable. Yeah? It's not hot at all. Dr. Akoth, we've been talking about AJS for a while. You are the vice chair of the steering committee on this. We have spoken to the chair, the Honorable Justice Professor Joel Ngoge. You are the vice chair. Are you a judge, a magistrate, a registrar? How do you end up in this committee?
Thank you very much. In fact, that is the essence of AJS, that for a vice chair, you don't need a judge, you don't need a magistrate, you don't need a judicial officer. I am an anthropologist by training, and I end up in this committee by the very fact that the committee is a multi-stakeholder committee, and I represent a constituency of the civil society, and also have another leg in the academia. That's how I end up here. But most important, if you look at the way the Honorable Chief Justice has described this strategy, she's called it multiple door. So when you talk about multiple door, then it also requires multiple perspectives, and it requires multiple actors. And that's how I come in.
You're the alternative door
Yes, I'm the alternative door.
in the alternative justice system.
Yes, but again, when you talk about alternative door, alternative justice, it is not a hierarchy like Ngazi, or one is number one is number two. They all stand in parallel in terms of all of them are of equal importance and of equal utility, only that there's a menu of choice. So you go to a restaurant and you have matumbo, you have maini, you have, githeri, and you can choose which one to take. It doesn't mean that any of them is of any hierarchy. In fact, in high-end hotels, the cost of githeri could be higher than the cost of fish. Thank you.
So you represent basically the user's voice in the pursuit of justice.
Yeah. Well,
Because now the others are representing, the
no, we nuance it a little bit because you see,
dispensers.
when you talk about multiple door, it means that the providers of justice are not just the judiciary.
Yeah.
So civil society, for example, are also providers of justice. Yes, essentially we see them as users, but they are also providers because a group like an NGO like FIDA Kenya works with the Council of Elders in Nyakach to resolve a land issue. So they are providers of justice. So the multiple door helps us to rework these categories of user and seeker. So at one point, the seeker of justice becomes a producer, becomes a dispenser of justice. At another point, of course, he or she becomes a user. Equally, you have situations where the courts refer cases back to alternative justice system mechanisms. For example, land cases. So complex. What do you do? Tell us, sit, talk about this, bring it back. So the court then becomes a seeker, invites the Wazayas to be interlocutors in working with it to attain justice.
So it's cyclical in nature.
Yes, exactly.
And is that what is being encouraged now? That it could be you then at some point who is seeking justice, and then at another point it is you then who is facilitating justice.
Absolutely. And it reworks. If you look at Article 48 of the Constitution of Kenya, it says that the state has a duty to ensure that all of us get access to justice. Now, what is access? Now, access does not just now mean sit back, wait, be given justice. It now means be an actor in producing the environment and providing justice. But before, the essence was everything to kutane kotini. And, let's meet in court. And court was a place where we will go and receive justice. But now the idea is, no, be an actor, produce the environment, facilitate relationships that can enhance production and then access to justice. Yeah.
Several AJS, shall I call them courts, have been established. There's Kajiado. The other day we were talking about a new one being launched in Nakuru and all. If you were to give us just like the success stories or the stories so far of AJS, what would you say? Give us, for example, what's happening in Kajiado since AJS was introduced.
Thank you. So the success in Kajiado, for instance, is at 3 levels. First of all, the Honorable Chief Justice has brought a very good idea that when she launches new courts, the old courts create physical space for the elders to have a meeting room, and we call them AJS suites, or in Kiswahili, ukumbi wa AJS. And that's a big shift in terms of how the physical space of the courts are used. So that is one big benefit. Secondly, in terms of the utility, the cases, we have had many land cases in Kajiado remaining unresolved for many years. And the impact of that? One is that land is seen to be scarce. But it is not scarce. It's there in abundance, but there's a lot of it which you can't access because it's entangled in cases. Two is that the questions of those contestations are such that the court can't understand them. For example, somebody says, it's my brother who sold it, and I'd not given him consent. Legally, this guy does not need to give him consent, but culturally, he ought to have got consent. So the court can't understand. You have no legal right. What consent were you supposed to give? So again, AJS has helped now to go into the contestations which cannot be expressed through legal language. And thirdly, is that in the last 6 months since the launch of Kajiado, about 38 cases have been resolved via the elders. And these are cases which have remained pending in the courts for quite some time. And one may say that 38 is a small number, but bearing in mind that in this country we have land cases, be it succession or just mere issues of boundary and so on, which take as close to 10 years. So 38 cases in 6 months is a good thing. But we aren't looking at the success just in terms of the number of cases. We are looking at success in terms of the character of AJS being performative. That is, you solve one case, you prevent 2 from emerging. Or you solve one case, and that case solves another 3. So this performative function of AJS mechanisms is something that the courts are not quite able to do, and the AJS teams do it very well.
How receptive are these communities to the adjudication that is provided by the elders?
The communities, as you have always told us, are not homogeneous. So you have people who have some interest on the table, others are not on the table. So largely, there's been a receptiveness among the people who really want justice. But there are people also who see the situations of conflict and the dilemmas of what is just, what is unjust, as a space to get a few more coins, delay stuff. Like there are people who have a succession matter. So this one, I'll delay it for 20 years. So you go to the High Court, create technicalities, it goes to Court of Appeal, you want it back to High Court and so on. So it's quite a mixed bag, but largely I think many people want justice, seem to find this a useful mechanism of engaging and advancing their interest.
Why I ask the question is because if I look at many land issues, essentially they're community issues.
Exactly.
And even when the matter goes to court, members of the community, whether it is opinion leaders, whether it is community leaders, whatever you want to call them, are often required to lend their voice to whatever is ongoing because many of these things are also historical.
Absolutely.
Now, my question. I am aware that some training is given to members of these communities to understand certain details of how it is they can actually formalize these processes. But what do we have in place to expand these functions so that they take an even bigger role? Because it's not just land disputes. There will be disputes between clans. There will be dispute between married couples. There will be disputes between parents and their children. And many of them, once again, are within the community. So instead of escalating them to court, or rather the court system as we know it, this very group of elders, as we call them, given that they are right there in the community and they'll probably understand the details of these issues better than the court system.
Very true.
My question is, what are the plans to expand these functions and to expand the work of these people within the communities?
Thank you very much. First, indeed, land questions are the most engaged just because land is the most sort of explicit, contested matter in many of the cases that come to court. In fact, sometimes you see a matter is registered as murder, but the real issue was land. A matter is registered as a assault and so on. Now, but in terms of expanding the functions, you are completely right. The way we see AJS, for example, now in the moment of elections, is to see it as a toolkit that is fit for purpose. So you can use it in resolving issues of identity. For example, you remember when we had COVID at its height and the Bukusu Council of Elders insisted we have to go on with the initiation. It's a justice question. The same elders who resolve land questions are the ones who, for example, do that. The Moran as well and so on. So what we've done is to ask people, what therefore is justice? And we've suggested that you see justice in two ways. As a process and as an outcome. As a process in terms of typical values that we have here, equity, equality, fairness and so on. As an outcome, preserving and taking forward human dignity. So that way, therefore, the AJS mechanisms can be utilized and can be useful in not only matters that are utilitarian in terms of solving cases and so on, but it can also be useful in promoting peace, fostering cohesion, and so on.
Within the community, then, I know you talked about the identification of those who could stand in place to adjudicate over these matters. Are these then repeat officials, or then, depending on what the cases would be, then you have different people representative of a community? Or do people know, all right, since we're looking at an alternative, this gentleman or this lady is the one that we will go to on a regular basis? Or do you have a situation whereby several people around the community are selected?
Thank you. So it's quite organic. The AJS policy is not the one that established AJS. AJS existed long before.
Yes.
Always been there. So what we've done is to give them a criteria of identifying who is an elder. So, for example, an elder is not just,
an old person
like me or a male. So you have a criteria. Are they people who have who are known to be honest? Are they people of integrity? Are they people who have acceptance and so on? And you see, in most communities, therefore, with that criteria, they have elders at various levels. Some are clan elders, some are radio elders, some are church elders. So therefore, once you have them in that sort of big supply, then the communities are able to organize the particular team of elders they want to refer to based on the issue.
So sorry, I know you're not done, but just fueling that. So the community is the one that identifies based on their experience who the individuals would be then that would represent them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And our work is to offer like this now rays of sun to say, as you look at this individual, this is how to look at them. Remember our values in Article 10 of the Constitution. Remember the Bill of Rights. So, like for example, if you have a council of elders and it is full of it's only for men, then there's a problem because our Constitution says that that's a problem. If it's a council of elders and it's only for old people, then that's a problem. If it's a council of elders and it says that if you are not of a language group that belongs here, you can't be attended to or you can't belong, there's a problem. So that is what we do. We give you the rays of sun, sort of to help you to socialize this council of elders with the requirement in the Constitution.
Take us through a practical case, all right? So CT and I are squabbling over a piece of land in Kisaju.
Which is likely, yes.
Yes. And then we want to resolve this issue through AJS. So are we the ones to agree on how to empanel the AJS elders? Or who does that? How do we, just take us through how we shall find our justice?
Very good. Thank you. So there are 3 ways in which the elders empanel themselves. One is the one that call themselves autonomous AJS mechanisms, where, in a typical village, in a typical marketplace, there are people who either through practice or through selection are known to be the leaders in dispute resolution. So you approach them. Once you approach them, they empanel themselves. They know how to organize themselves. So that is one. Two, you could go to a quasi-governmental institution. You could go to the chief. You could go to an NGO, and the NGO therefore would work with the elders to say, look, let's form a team to resolve this matter. That's what we call the third party. So the third party comes and works with the autonomous, okay, and then panel. The third one is a court annexed, where you take a matter to court, and the court says, well, this one looks like the puzzle requires a little bit of engagement with the local situation that we aren't able to deploy, to then approach the existing councils of elders. So essentially the power to empanel is not on the complainant, so that you go and fabricate your own mechanism. But the system has worked really is that people tend to know who to approach. I'm sure even me and you, in our local communities, we know who to approach, and then we leave them with the power to empanel and so on. But two key criteria. We have suggested that you start by being outside. So you choose to go in. So you can't be told that if you're Turkana, then you must go to Turkana Council of Elders. No, you choose. That's very important. What we call the agency theory. You choose yourself. And two is that you also choose to exit. So it means that even if you go to a Council of Elders or an AJS mechanism, then you're not sort of chained there. You can always exit it.
Sure. You talked about, I mean, and it is clear, just looking at, historical tradition in communities, is that there was always a way in which disputes were settled amongst communities,
Indeed.
mirroring this exact same thing that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Now, with this title that we've given it as AGS,
Yes.
Are we essentially saying that these processes continue within community? But what we're saying now is then, as far as the judicial system is concerned, that these decisions then that are taken at a community level then become binding in law, whatever the case may be.
Very good. Yeah, I think you've touched a very primary question there. So what we're saying is that if you look at Article 159 2C of the Constitution, the judiciary, we recognized that although we are giving judicial power to the judiciary because it's delegated power from the people, but we realize that there are many cases, most cases are not resolved by the judiciary. So we ask ourselves, so what do you do? So in then exercising its power, judiciary is asked to promote these mechanisms. So it means that if a matter is determined by those mechanisms in a way that meets the test of fair process and adherence to the dictates of the Constitution, then the judiciary will not say, that's kangaroo court, we don't recognize it.
Right.
Yeah, it is duty bound
to recognize this.
To recognize it.
So I'm sorry. So is there any time or any possibility where then there would be a circumvention of the process by the judiciary to then later come in and say that this case at the community level via the AGS mechanism has been determined? However, because of 1, 2, 3 factors, we feel as judiciary, again, as the court, that we must then step in and either, number one, overturn the decision made by the AGS mechanism, or be involved in the process because of 1, 2, 3, then would there ever be an instance where that could happen?
The answer is
that
yes.
could be seen to then maybe undermine the AGS process?
So the answer is yes, the judiciary is required now. Because, initially you could ignore and say, we don't recognize it. But now they have to take notice of that process. And indeed, what you said is true. Remember, the judicial authority, although is derived from the people have delegated it to the judiciary. So the judiciary has the ultimate responsibility of making sure that justice is done.
Right.
So yes, they can call a matter, they can review it. What they can't do is to say, Bure Kabisa can't exist. No.
Okay.
Yeah. So they have to take notice that this is a legitimate process. But yes, in terms of corrective measures, in terms of making sure that justice is done, that still remains the purpose.
Even overturning a determination?
Well, they can, yes. If it's so clear that the matter, the way it has been processed, and the outcome that has been delivered is basically inconsistent with either the law or inconsistent with the with the other policies or inconsistent with the just outcome, they can. And Article 159, 3 ABC talks just about that of the Constitution. That yes, there are bases upon which it is possible to overturn and in fact put aside those processes by AGS mechanisms.
Let's take a break. It's 7:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, The Situation Room. Dr. Steve Akoth is the Vice Chairperson of the National Steering Committee on Implementation of Alternative Justice Systems in the country. This is an initiative of the Chief Justice, part of her strategy for enhanced access to justice across the country for everybody. And that's what we've been talking about, alternative justice systems, how it's working, the model, and how we can also take advantage of this in this particular case. You know, Daktari, I sold CT a piece of land in Kisaju, honestly, and he paid me. The only problem is I'd forgotten that I'd also sold the same land to, 2 years
You
earlier.
forgot it?
I forgot that this is the same land. Niko na shamba mingi.
Yes.
So this one I forgot I had sold the same one.
Actually, you know, Dr. this man forgets very often because he forgot that he had even sold it to other people before that. Yes.
Now City wants his money back. Nasina pesa.
And
I'm
those are
telling
quite-
him to wait.
And that's quite common.
To wait. I
Wait
give
for
him
him to
another
sell the
land
land
in
again.
Lamu.
Again,
To
and
somebody
then pay you
else.
back.
I give you money. Keep it here for more. Good morning.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
On Facebook, on YouTube, and on www.spicefm.co.ke. It's Thursday. It's there for #Justice Thursday. And the conversation we're having this morning is on alternative justice solutions. And we have the Vice Chair of the National Steering Committee on Implementation of Alternative Justice Systems in the country, Dr. Steve Akoth. City.
The discussion of authenticity, when someone goes to court simply because of where the actual building where justice is dispensed is in a supposedly neutral place, there's a certain authority that is lent to that institution. Now, when we talk about Council of Elders in this country, unfortunately, in many instances, they are seen as instruments that politicians use to serve their interest. Where would they function from? We've had this discussion before, and we're told that there have been attempts by different institutions to try and see if they can have a centralized place from which they can actually handle their matters. So I'm asking the question, so that the thought of neutrality is enhanced, is it a good idea might it be a good thought to have a premise from which these Council of Elders or the elders, however you want to refer to them, to have a place where they can dispense their functions, either at a chief's camp or a place where there is a court of law or some place which has a government stamp on?
Okay, thank you. So now, that's a fairly difficult question, but it has two sides. So the question of legitimacy must start with the spirit of the Constitution, which is a very important thing. What is the Constitution guiding us in terms of what should be the source of this authenticity or this stamp of approval? And the Constitution is deliberately very emphatic. If you look at Article 1, if you look at Article 159 itself, this notion of the people. So before, we had the logic of the state, the Baba and Mama state. But the Constitution is trying to move us away from that and say, look, Article 159 starts by saying judicial authority is derived from the people. So it's telling the people, yes, you have proclaimed to yourself to have a constitution and you have installed a judiciary, but the power, the authenticity, the stamp of approval comes from you. So while ordinarily there has been the feeling that the official state approval is the most important, the Constitution is telling people, no, go back to yourself. And that's very important. Now, but more practically, I really agree with you that there has been challenges of bias, challenges of equity, challenges of equality, and some of these are perception issues. Where are you holding your meetings? If you're holding your meetings in the House of the person who is known as the major violator, then the perception is already out there. So the judiciary has done a good thing. That's why it has created what I'm calling the ukumbis. So the ukumbis are sort of, so to say, neutral places. And the courts have given this free of charge. In Nakuru, there's an ukumbi now, and Kajiado, there's an ukumbi. And the vision of the Chief Justice that wherever she launches new courts, there will be an ukumbi. But practically also in everyday life, we are encouraging actors to make sure that their engagement with justice must also deal with perception question. Because as the matter goes, justice is not just done, but must be seen to be done. Where are you holding your meetings? Who is convening the meetings? Who is communicating that the sessions are going to be convened? Where are the sessions convened? At what time? You know, the problem we're having in justice system, for example, in certain sectors is where meetings of the elders are held late in the evening. That means that women will definitely have problems. Or they're held in houses where the youth are uncomfortable and so on. So that perception question is a question we put forward. And finally, there's a movement that has also worked very well towards solving that. And that's a youth movement with the social justice centers. The social justice centers are like neutral spaces where communities can convene, have conversations, and they become very good spaces also for convening AJS sessions in many communities. Dandora, for example, has a vibrant justice center. Madare, vibrant justice center. Kajiado also, vibrant justice center, and many places in Western Kenya as well.
You know, the perception, I'm glad you've touched on perception, because the optics in some of these cases are perhaps of paramount importance. Why? Because historically, people have associated justice with a certain perception that they have of the locale where this process takes place, the people who are actually in charge of dispensing it, and so forth. Now, once the system is entrenched, then it doesn't really matter.
Absolutely.
Where it is that the elders meet to dispense. It could be in the school backyard, it could be in a church compound, mosque. It doesn't really matter. But until that is reached,
Yes.
Because it's like we're clawing back time. There was a time when, yes, meetings and dispensing of justice were community affairs, but we moved away from that, and now we want to go back to it. Now, let me ask the question. What are the timelines for trying to ensure that we have a semblance of what we are talking about in literally every county in the country?
Thank you very much. Yeah. So, one of the strategies that we've deployed as a committee is to devolve. So we have a policy which outlines how AJS ought to be unfolded. So we have developed a strategy of devolving that. So we are working with the AJS mechanisms and the court users committees at the county level to develop action plans at the county levels, which will then help to domesticate and create a localized framework for operationalizing this. And the timeline is quite short. Our committee has 5 years sunset time. We have already
Beginning when?
We are banning our second year now.
Okay.
So we have 3 more years to go, and we are hoping that, God willing, in 3 years, every county in this country will have an action plan which mobilizes all justice stakeholders around this court users committee to have AJS mechanisms operationalized in every county of this country.
So with that sunset clause and with the plan to have AJS established in all the counties, there'll come a time when people will be like, okay, so many of these cases are actually now being offloaded from the main judiciary route. So AJS becomes busy.
Yes.
Then people will start saying, now, surely, it's occupying too much of our time, because as it gains popularity, it becomes sort of like the main part, the first port of call for very many people who have disputes. Will you be able to pay the people who are sitting?
Very
in
true.
these
That's a
panels?
difficult and real question. But look at also this in other sectors. This is exactly what happened with the midwifery in this country, where the traditional birth attendants have over time now become major actors in ensuring self-delivery and ensuring good care for our mothers and managing maternal system. Initially, the public health system basically had pushed them aside and they were condemned. But now, almost every county in this country, because remember health is a devolved function, almost every county has developed a policy or a law to promote traditional birth attendance. And the county government are putting money into it. So we want to take this to the county, and we're hoping county government will put money into it. Look, for example, the question of culture. Culture is basically within the mandate of the county government. And we've seen a county like Makueni, which has put significant amount of money in the culture question. Counties like Isiolo have put a lot of money on the culture function. So we hope that with the county action plan, the county government will be able to allocate money in this function, and that will enable the elders, because the elders do not just perform, justice question, and that's why we are not calling it dispute resolution. Justice question, as you said initially, is a broader function. You'll get that this same group of people working to resolve matters are the ones who Kenya Highways Authority will work with when they're building a road, and they want people to move. They're the same ones where during emergency, they will be deployed by the Red Cross to be part of that movement for humanitarian intervention. They're the same ones whom tomorrow a mosque, a church is doing a function and they want some opinion leaders, will deploy them. So the county government, therefore, we hope, will find this category of actors as very useful interlocutors, and will put money into it. We also hope that the judiciary gets funded better, and if it gets funded better, the support that is giving the Court Users Committee will percolate into supporting these systems.
And even creating more court, what are we calling them?
Absolutely.
Not the rooms, what are they calling?
Ukumbi.
Ukumbis.
Yes.
Creating more ukumbis.
Exactly.
So, can I get specific into cases now? I mean, of course, not the merits of a case, but things that could happen around a case. That if then you go into one of these, AJSs, right, and something happens, as would happen normally. Maybe the individual now who has been put or as the determiner of the case, or the one who will hear, something happens to them mid-process. How does this carry out in the same way that a court would, that somebody else is appointed, or then do you go through the process again from the beginning?
Take an example, and that's a very practical question. Here in Nairobi, at the toy market, one of the cases that many of the AGS mechanisms engage is the question of the loan. People get loans, and the loans are sometimes at rates that are fairly high. And so, you are lent money, and if you can't pay, you know what happens. You go for exile in a rural home and hope that
and they won't find you there.
they can't find you.
And they forget.
But what we have seen is that the AGS mechanisms have a very good case management system where they manage it both to resolve it, but also to support the person who is involved in the matter. And if one party who is part of the process falls off, either unwell or because of other engagement, there are always other parties who can take it along. And I've seen that work very well in trade market. So on one side, there are those who would help track the person and get, why aren't you paying? So they don't start by condemning, why aren't you paying? And interestingly, there are many cases in trade market where the people resolving the conflict between the lender and one of their own would say, okay, now we've seen that you really have a problem, you can't pay. We will now deploy the market, other traders, to raise money to help you pay. So it's a very collectivized approach, and that means that if one person falls off, then it doesn't need to start afresh. It will always continue. But besides that, it's not just about finding you guilty. It's about resolving the source of the problem. You can't pay. Why? Is it because you have no money, or is it because you're becoming difficult? If you have no money, the guys always come off around to help you to make the payments.
So what happens if something happens to the determiner of the case and there is a process that's ongoing? Falling sick. Mid-hearing. Fallen sick. We know what happens in court. There's an adjournment or such until then this happens. But here we are dealing with a less formal process. So what happens? Then who then steps in and says, all right, let's hold on to this until we can get somebody else who comes and steps in. Remembering that the process of this, initiating this individual was a communal process.
Exactly.
So what happens mid-case when something like that occurs?
Very good. First, you must remember that even the courts themselves are being told to be careful not to take too much consideration of the technical approaches. For example, I've seen in our courts recently, there's a prescribed way of writing an affidavit. And then you have an affidavit, and they know it before a judge, and the judge can see that this was not done in the procedural way. Many judges today would say, okay, let's continue. We didn't follow the procedure, but that does not undermine the substantive questions. So what has happened is that the many AJS mechanisms, also in tandem, also, and courts also, are very relaxed on these technicalities. So in many cases, and this is a very important question, and allow me to divert a bit and take you to what I saw in South Africa, when the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission was convening and taking statements. Almost everybody who came to the commission would say, before they attacked me, I had just visited so-and-so. I had just said bye-bye to so-and-so, and then. I was coming from seeing so-and-so, and then. So there's this social connectivity. And many cases that are dealt with by AJS mechanisms have this connectivity. My father was part of it, or my mother was part of it, or my brother was part of it. So it becomes very easy in many occasions for somebody to stand in as a proxy. Because your matter is not solely your matter. There's a connectivity with other people who feel it or who are also interested in it being resolved. And that would help me also bring another matter which has been raised often, the role of lawyers in AJS. You know, when people talk about representation, they think representation is just an advocate appearing and so on. But it's not just that. We
With
know
language.
African societies.
Kizungu mingi.
African societies, your uncle, your auntie would come and speak for you, isn't
Yep,
it?
yep.
Even me at my age, in many cases in my rural home, my father goes in to sit in for me, including on significant issues like even purchase of land. So representation is acceptable. It's done a lot in AJS mechanisms, and that then also deals with that question of what happens if the interlocutor himself or herself is absent. But this social connectivity is an integral thing which is very important, and the courts are also trying to pick up from it.
I may stick on this, Dr. Akoth, and this, if we can just take a few steps back, that this individual or this, this group of determinants in the community, must there be communal acceptance of this individual, or must there at least be a similar thread that has run through that we say, okay, fine, this is the person who is going to adjudicate over this matter? It doesn't have to be that. At least the two parties must agree that, fine, this is the person that we're going to bring this case to, and they will hear and then determine thereafter. Must there be that, communal acquiescence of that individual?
No. And let me give an example, what I'm seeing in Garissa, in the Maslaha system. In many Islamic societies, it is clear that many of the structures are fairly male-dominated.
Yes.
But women still take their matters there. But how do they do it? What I've seen they do, they start by mobilizing support. So I want to take the matter to Maslaha, but I'll make sure the chief is aware of this matter. I'll report the matter to the police. I'll report the matter to the sheikh. I'll report the matter to the women group. So what this person has done is ring-fencing a system of accountability. So the people watching are so many that then the chances that injustice will be tolerated becomes low. Yeah. So they don't start by saying, no, before I sit in the panel or before I go to the panel, I need women to be members. Before I go to the panel, I need so-and-so. No, they mobilize other resources to ring fence. So the eyes that are put on the system is so intense that the system really has to act in a just way. So that's how it works in many situations. I think people are not going out to say the panel must be constituted in X, Y, Z. But people mobilize other accountability resources to make sure that whichever panel is there, then the level of accountability is so high. And if it's bogus, then it just falls on its own. But that's not to say that these panels are perfect.
Sure.
In fact, there are a lot of problems, I must say, that, for example, there are those who are basically entrepreneurs, especially in this year of elections. So tomorrow, you see, if you go and you have a better jacket than myself, you are made an elder, a Luo elder. Tomorrow, Latif comes, she comes. So the other one is, of course, we have this masculinity is still a big problem in many councils of elders. Not just elders which are cultural elders, like language-based, even in markets. If you go to markets where you have elders, it's still very masculine. And lastly is a question of whose culture. Culture is a source of power.
Sure.
And people tend to interpret culture very positionally. If it favors me, it's interpreted this way. Favors this one. So those contradictions exist. And that is part of why we as a committee are so invested in awareness and training. And this awareness and training is not about training people what is culture, but how to see culture in the optics of justice.
So then is AJS also then a vanguard of culture to say that even as these cases are being, determined, that there is the protection of culture that must be played out here? Because here we are talking about, societies male-dominated still. Women don't necessarily have an issue with it, but at the same time, there's the preserve of culture that then must be recognized by the AJS.
Exactly. Article 11 of our Constitution talks about culture in two ways. There's a culture of what we produce, what we have every day, our identities and so on, but also talks about the future culture, the culture with a small c and capital C.
Right.
So the part of culture that AJS and the task force is interested in doing is help us. What is a culture of Kenyanness? And that's what the Constitution envisages. So we don't start by confronting culture as a bad thing. We say it's okay, it's important, but there are tangents that should help us in living our culture. The way you live, because again, culture is dynamic, it's always unfolding, and so on.
Dr.
Yes.
So AJS does not handle criminal cases, right?
Who said that?
I'm thinking criminal cases, for example. If there is issues of murder, there are cases that will not go through AJS. True?
There are cases that will not go through it, but the criteria is not civil and criminal. Because these categories of civil and criminal, they're important, but they are not natural categories. They are categories that have been defined out of certain mode of legal and just reasoning. But in our everyday life, the AJS mechanisms have a role in almost all kinds of cases, including criminal cases. But remember what I say, the test. Urgency
Of the matter.
No. By agency, I don't mean agency UG, I mean agency AG.
Okay. All right.
The person themselves.
The agent.
The agent, yeah. The voluntariness of being able to engage and ability to do so. So, for example, on issues of, if a child, for example, is violated sexually or through other forms of physical abuse, it's very difficult for a child to choose whether to go to elders or not. So you say this matters when it comes to defilement, when it comes to matters of children, keep off. Issues of state, issues of elections, keep off. But issues of
domestic disputes.
Sorry?
Domestic disputes.
Those ones, yes. Even issues of what you're calling criminal offenses. Remember, what you're calling a criminal matter has various shades of it. And you get that AJS has a role to play in resolving some shades of it. So I wouldn't say explicitly that criminal matters are outside the purview of AJS, outside the shades of it, where AJS plays an important role, and indeed a useful role.
Theft of livestock is criminal.
Yes, exactly.
And the likelihood is that community will know who their thieves are.
And there are sanctions, for example, I saw now in many pastoralist communities. If you go to sell livestock in the market, You must show proof, of where it was
Yeah.
bred
Yes.
before it reached the age, of sellability.
How did the cow come here? Where did you get it from? Do we know? Does your neighbor know this cow?
Exactly.
Does your wife know you're selling the cow?
Exactly.
Have you agreed that
That is
this
so
is happening? Dr. we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to shed light. Every time we have this conversation, we all get to understand better what AJS is, what it's meant to be, how it's meant to work. From the beginning, it was not really clear. So, is this a kangaroo court? Was there sitting?
A giraffe coat.
Giraffe court. But it gets clearer and clearer. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I would just finish by saying, you see, look at it also vis-a-vis other sectors. Look at education, we've said, as we know, is not only found in schools. Healthcare, not only found in hospitals. Also, prayer, we don't only pray in mosque or synagogue or church.
Sure.
Equally, justice is not only found
In the courts. That's very good one. That's a very good way of putting it. Thank you very much. Dr. Steve Akoth is the Vice Chairperson of the National Steering Committee on Implementation of Alternative Justice Systems. He's been here with us. We've been talking about what AJS is doing, how it's helping to steer and shape conversations and implementation of AJS.